afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining in. I have the pleasure of hosting a very interesting topic today, transforming B2B payments, innovation, and trends. Before I get to the experts, quick summary of on the topic. The RBI Digital Payments Index that measures the extent of digitalization of payments in the country stood at 445 in March 2024, up from 395 in March 2023, showing an increase in acceptance and utilization of digital payments, the extent of innovation that's happening in the country in this space, and obviously improvements in infrastructure and payments performance. Global trade peaked in 2022. 2024-25 is definitely promising and there's recovery. And hence this will drive B2B payments significantly in the coming years. And there's no iota of doubt in any of our minds that our MSME sector is going to pedal the growth of our 5 trillion growth dream that we have, and definitely it's going to help make the economy more sustainable and more resilient. This obviously calls for more innovation in the B2B payment space. Retail payments is well established, but when it comes to B2B payments, it's more complex. It has extended payment cycles. There are reconciliation issues. Transaction values are large, and hence requires a different kind of innovation. And all the experts here on the panel are doing their bit in terms of B2B payments. To give you a quick synopsis, BBPS, for instance, has enabled invoice-backed payments to ensure syncing of reconciliation for both suppliers and buyers. It also helps facilitate registrations, TDS deductions, advance payments, and so on. CBDC is my personal belief will drive and accelerate B2B payments. Super apps is another innovation that will help integrate multiple stakeholders on one application, drive customer stickiness, and help increase the efficiency of B2B payments. So with this, I'll pass it on to the experts. It'll be great if we can hear from each one of you opening remarks on the topic. Maybe Ajay, I'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Shweta. Great to be here at GFF. So I think, based on all the background you've given, Shweta, there's another big number for commercial payments in India that's $8 trillion. So that's the potential when you look at domestic and international flows. And we are tackling domestic, also looking at international flows, and of course, the guys to my left are very focused on the cross-border flows, which is an important facet of B2B. But let's just start with the basics, right? So what sort of plagues the B2B space, what are the challenges, the friction areas? And here we can start with the very basic. And if you look at small businesses today, even invoice digitalization is not a highly penetrated aspect of B2B flows. And then you go to the other basics of invoice matching up PO with an invoice, and then manufacturing with the GRM. All these things are very integral part of B2B payments and tied to the payments ultimately. So a lot of digitization has to happen on this. Then if you go at you have industries, verticals, nuances over there. A lot of solutions are very common and don't address specifics. So again, there's a lot of work to be done as we develop further from truly digitizing B2B payments. And then as you touched upon aspects when it comes to corporates or SMEs, they're using multiple interfaces to manage all these B2B payments and processes. And that sort of, again, needs to be stitched together from a reconciliation standpoint. And of course, for the longest time, we've thrown bad UX and UI at B2B. So we need to also sort of work on that aspect as we've solved for consumer largely over the years. And And then finally, working capital is another key aspect, and it's always not well integrated, or as today we call it embedded finance. So I think as we start to embed finance into the streams of payments and processes, it will become even more impactful from a B2B standpoint.
Thanks so much, Ajay. I think I just build on what Ajay said, so it will sound a whole lot different. I think he covered all the complexities in B2B payments for us, and look at it, like he said, we at Xflow very sharply focused on the cross-border side, not as much on the domestic. But if I look at it overall, I think one of the themes that emerges from what Ajay said is that there is a ton of heterogeneity in B2B payments. There's many different ways people solve the problem. There's different workflows. Depending on industry, it looks very different. And one of our fundamental beliefs and thesis is that the role we can play as a payments provider is to be sort of an infrastructure provider. Provide people the building blocks, the API infrastructure, so multiple people can go solve problems for different folks. Right? So we at Xflow are not trying to be the solution for everything that people have around B2B payments, but we are saying, can we create payments infrastructure that will enable a bunch of different companies that are looking at B2B verticals across different segments and saying, how do I solve for this? So a very simple example of that is we have, for example, a tax or automation software company that used to help companies with just figuring out how to manage taxes with their end. Now, by enabling payments infrastructure for them, we are allowing them to also make the tax payments. Similarly with compliance companies, similarly with invoice factoring companies. So we provide infrastructure that makes it really easy for these folks to go to digitize and make B2B payments and the entire B2B sort of ecosystem a lot simpler for people to manage. So I think if you ask me for one trend, I would say that going back to Ajay, what Ajay said, not just embedded finance, within that embedded payments can truly sort of make it very easy for bunch of companies in the ecosystem to sort of innovate on top of that.
I'm very glad to be here. I hope you can hear me well. So just wanted to build on what Anand and Ajay have already mentioned, but I think we should also take a step back. There is research that says that about 30% of B2B payments, and I'm talking about global B2B payments, are digital. About 70% are still offline, right, or non-digital. And just compare that with, let's say, B2C and another C2C payments. The number there is about 70% of B2C payments are digital, right? And just want to emphasize all the problems that we just heard about. Those are the problems that are driving maybe this small growth in digitization, or this challenge in digitization in B2B payments. At EBANX is by the way listed Fintech. We have been trying to solve this problem across the globe, especially in rising economies, whether it's LATAM, it's India, it's Africa. And our learnings from trying to solve this problem across the globe are the problems are heterogeneous in B2B payments, right? And there are various innovations that we have tried to do, whether it's in customer journeys, whether it's tax automation, whether it's something else, that we have also tried to do to ensure that people use digital modes for B2B payments. But I just wanted to get that number there because that shows how stark and how big the market actually is for digital B2B payments.
Thanks for the introduction, Shweta, and very valid comments from all my peers here. I think particularly a couple of things which really struck a chord. I think Ajay said that we throw bad UI UX at B2B, and that's been a consistent pattern for many decades. So I think I truly agree with that, and that's one of the things that we are trying to solve at Skydo. The other thing is, I think Rashmi said that B2C, C2B, and C2C are already digitized in majority. There is still enough to be solved, but in B2B, the digitization percentage itself is very low. So that's combining these two things. I think that's the reason why we started Skydo. So we are trying to solve for small and medium businesses, so completely one end of the spectrum, which is businesses and freelancers who cannot be served well, scalably and sustainably by banks. because that service model is often labor intensive and cannot be cost sustainable at scale. So we are trying to digitize their experience and try to provide them the same kind of experience that an enterprise would get from their banker. So and along with this, from a UI UX perspective, I think why B2B is different from P2P or other kinds of payment is that a business has its own habits, it has its own idiosyncrasies. Somebody uses a particular invoicing software, somebody has invoicing built in Microsoft Excel, and so on. So when you solve for their payment, you've got to wrap around everything else that they do in their life, which happens before or after payment. For example, we've integrated with a few invoicing softwares so that invoices and payments get matched against each other automatically. Now, these are some of the things that are just not required in P2P and so on. So we particularly focus on cross-border payments, but I think the same problem exists for domestic as well. So to Ajay's point, it's a $8 trillion domestic market and then about $1 trillion of, about a couple of $1 trillion of cross-border market. So that's what we're all focused on.
Thank you, Movin. So I hear invoice digitization, finance, payments. But I think what was interesting is that all of you spoke about experience, the customer experience, how do you sort of navigate challenges in, getting physical to digital for the businesses. So Ajay, if I were to come to you, and I did speak about super apps specifically, and interestingly, Deloitte and PCI were soon launching a paper on super apps, and this is one of the insights that have come in from industry conversations on the lack of user experience. So if you could throw some light on, some of the innovations that you see in B2B which would solve user experience, help drive cost efficiency and process improvements, that'd be great.
Yeah, and just to add some stats, Rashmi alluded to it. Only 5% of businesses truly have accounts payable. So it's a very small number. So lots of ground to cover over there. And to your point on super apps, stats say about 70% of businesses are looking for a single interface. Right? And that's the challenge today, right? So multiple interfaces present to businesses. Then the reconciliation issues. So I think if you look at, I think it's one company can't do it all. We all have to work together to get to that end state. But I think we have to look across the value chain. And B2B, there are so many touch points. Within those touch points, workflows. So to be able to look at that from a holistic perspective, so that you can digitize the entire stream. And that requires obviously connecting the dots, right? So there are different systems at play. We need to sort of connect all of those interfaces and arrive at an end state where business actually only works with one interface and everything else is back-end, right? So that's sort of our dream and objective to get to that end state. And we can't do it on our own. We're working with so many fintechs to get to that stage. So I think that's how we look at it. So it's the integration, amalgamation of all existing systems at play for a business. And of course, you can go further, and we can get to that stage next. But right now, even getting past this stage is important. Then of course, further modernization for B2B through by embedding payments, as Anand mentioned, into the business processes and all of that will also play out in the future, but I think we have enough ground to cover.
Interesting. Anand, if I were to come to you, it'd be nice to elaborate on a few specific use cases that you believe will really make the difference in terms of B2B innovations.
Yeah, a lot of my sort of experiences are in the cross-border space, but within that, there's some of the instances very specifically that we've seen. Like, so there's a bunch of startups that are doing very interesting work around making it easy for B2B companies to manage their cash efficiently. Now, this is something that large enterprises do very easily. It comes very naturally into their managing the terms at which they get paid. It's a very simple sort of thing. It's not rocket science. But very few small, medium-sized enterprises, MSMEs actually have a sense of how to manage this really well. And there are really interesting startups coming up saying, we'll help you manage this. We'll help you tell you exactly how much working capital you need. And if you reduce your terms, this is how much lesser working capital you need. And if you sort of start using invoice factoring, then this is how much lesser working capital you need. So there's a bunch of very interesting startups in this space that's saying, let's bring, like Movin said, the best-in-class forecasting and cash management capabilities to SMEs and micro SMEs as well, but without all the sort of capital expenditure that large enterprises typically have in this space. So you don't need to like invest in a huge system for this. You don't need an ERP system. They will help you sort of manage all of this super efficiently on your own. And I think those kinds of companies we see a lot across different. So I know one that works specifically with garment manufacturers and exporters, and they've fine-tuned their entire algorithm to make sure that they can help estimate and forecast for these folks really well. And they are now starting to integrate, like Movin said, how do I integrate payments with accounting? So the flow of, not just the flow of funds, but the flow of information happens very seamlessly. So these are all super interesting things that I see happening at a very micro level, very specifically, right? Similarly, there's another startup we work with that solves the compliance headaches for a lot of SMEs, which is, especially in the cross-border space, sometimes very it's a big headache for a lot of the smaller companies. And so they just say, we'll help you solve all of this. And we will give you all the paperwork, we'll make sure you don't have to worry about anything when it comes to compliance on any of your cross-border trades. And they digitize the whole piece. They make it very easy for their customers to know in one place. They have all the compliance documents. They don't have to go looking for all of these things. So it's getting a lot better, and I think it's largely, based on my experience at least, due to a lot of innovation happening across the ecosystem with a bunch of different startups who are all approaching different segments, different industries, and saying, how do I take this problem you have and make that a whole lot easier for you? And I think now we are beginning to see building blocks for all these folks to start assembling different solutions using others in the ecosystem who are giving them the right infrastructure to bring all of that together.
Rashmi, come to you in terms of B2B payments landscape. You all spoke about the complexities across markets. How does our innovations differ vis-a-vis some of the other markets that you've had experience in? What are some of the big pain points that you see globally, which obviously is relevant for India, that needs to be solved?
Thanks. I think we've kind of touched upon all of those points right now, right? Like I said, there's a lot of similarity in the B2B payments landscape across the world. Digitization is still low, and the digitization is low again because B2B payments are inherently complex. And again, I have seen more of the cross-border payments or B2B payments because again, the bank specializes in cross-border payments. And I think the problems are similar. What Ajay was mentioning, Movin also mentioned, which is UI UX, customer convenience, that's just lacking, right? And there are a lot of, obviously there are a lot of companies that are trying to solve the problem, but hand in hand, I don't think there's one company that is solved it all. And that's why I think what Anand also mentioned is that it's an ecosystem that you have to plug into. Ajay also mentioned the same thing, you have to plug into an ecosystem. And that's exactly what we see happening globally as well. One of the other things that I want to mention here, when we're talking about customer convenience, especially when we're talking about cross-border payments now, B2B payments, at least from what we have seen in other markets, is when you have local payment methods. So if a business can use a local payment method to make the cross-border payment, that kind of improves their experience significantly, right? What I mean is, in Brazil, if people can use Fix to pay, in India, if people can use UPI to make their payments, even in a cross-border scenario, I think that also improves the customer convenience significantly, right? So it's not just, UI UX is not just the design element of it, it's also like these smaller things, which is payment methods being used. How well are you then digitizing the whole ecosystem, which is invoice digitization, compliance concerns, tax concerns, etc. So I think those learnings exist even from the other markets, right? And in fact, like EBANX is trying to do this in LATAM and Africa, and we have tried to build these solutions on our own. We realize that we also have to do a lot of partnerships in order to be able to build a scalable B2B solution. Yeah, so I think in a nutshell, the payment problems remain similar, and it's an ecosystem.
Quite interesting. So I think familiarity to the existing systems and leveraging that to really upskill. Movin, if I were to come to you, everybody talks about AI, blockchain, emerging technologies, digital currencies, so on. One of the things that has driven customers taking us to retail payments is, the efficiency, the detection of fraud, and really the confidence that you created in customers to make those payments. What are some of the technologies that you believe will drive this in terms of transparency, efficiency for B2B payments?
I think I'll start with something that's a little counter to what you asked, which is my fundamental belief is that in B2B we've not even done the basic things well yet. So AI and blockchain are actually a few thousands of miles away before we actually start applying those and start taking advantage of those. I think just doing the basics well. I mean, if the AI wave actually forces us to do those things better than before, that's welcome. But I do feel that some of the basics just need to be revisited, and just making better UI UX is one of the things that we are focusing on. That said, I'm a techie and I do love the fact that we now have access to much more technology and much better efficiency in that technology compared to say a decade back. And to that extent, I believe particularly cross-border payments, one of the biggest risks and also one of the biggest costs is money laundering and financial crime, particularly with a country like India, also terrorist financing and so on. And there, I think AI and machine learning, etc., I'm not sure about blockchain, can play a big role in detection of fraud, detection of risk, or detection of suspicion, and aided with some human element can actually build a much better, much more efficient, and much more foolproof system for detecting these risks. So that's one of the things that Skydo is focusing on, and in general, I think the ecosystem is focusing on, and can actually make cross-border payments safer, more compliant, and ultimately the cost of this compliance and cost of managing this risk comes from the pocket of the customer. So to that extent, it can make cross-border payments cheaper, and that's one of the things that I think we are all trying to solve for.
Interesting. I think the cost element still remains an important factor. Ajay, if I were to come to you, what, according to you, are the top 3 trends that will drive innovations in the B2B space in the next few years?
Yeah, so as Movin said, I think in the near term, I think it's focusing on the basics, all the challenges and friction that exists in B2B. But if you were to, look ahead, there are a few things that I've touched upon it. I think, every business has its business processes. So how do we marry digital payments with existing business processes? Then to just double click on that, embedding these payments into the financial planning, could be inventory. All of this, sort of helps you introduce these digital aspects without disruption, without having to learn new systems. So that's very critical as we modernize digital payments going forward. So that's, I think, at a high level. And then I think all of this also will lead to better streamlining of payments, whether it's domestic or cross-border, and ultimately also visibility, cash flow management, all of that gets unlocked. Digitizing the industry. So that's something get to in the future, but right now the basics need to be used.
So unlocking the entire value chain and the journey is what will drive innovation. Anand, question to you is specifically on cross-border B2B payments. One part is the transaction itself, but I think there are other elements of currency conversion, transaction speed, and then of course regulatory compliances. What are some of the innovations that you're seeing in the market? Let's give some examples.
Yeah, sure. I think in terms of transaction speed itself, like now, like Xflow or Skydo for that matter, like I think we tend to make that much faster. And going back to I think what Rashmi was saying, a lot of the cross-border payments are now becoming local payments. So if I'm invoicing my customer in the US, I no longer rely only on Swift to get my money. I can get paid using a Fed wire in the US, which is near real time, and then last mile in India is over in EFT, which is again near real time. So it's in terms of time, it takes very little time to move money across. In terms of cost, again very little cost because both legs at both ends are using local bank rails, which are much more efficient and cheaper. And the overall experience, like today, what I've seen, like when merchants use a solution like ours, they get full visibility to where their money is at any point. And one of the funny anecdotes I heard as we were beginning to start our company was like a merchant would tell us like when I order something on Flipkart or Amazon today, I get like 7 SMS messages on where my package is. It left this warehouse, it's now in the flight, now it's landed, now it's reaching home. But then I'm receiving a $100,000 payment from my customer, I have no idea where my money is. And that's stuck, right? And then it's funny that in today's day and age, we're in that place where I don't know where my money is. Am I getting it today? Am I getting it tomorrow? It's sometimes a guessing game for a lot of people. And so using technology and partnering with the right folks, we can actually make that very transparent so you actually see where your money is. Like when Swiggy launched the capability to see where your food is, it was amazing in that day. Today you can see where your money is. If you want to see where your food is, it's more important to see where your money is. So I think those are the kinds of things we see. Again, going back to Movin's point, this seems very elementary in today's world. But in B2B payments, it feels like remarkably new and interesting. So I think over time, my sort of biggest takeaway with payments specifically is that more and more cross-border payments is going to become domestic, local payments. And by relying on local bank rails across the world, we can actually make it much faster and cheaper to move money across, right? And then with newer technologies like blockchain and all that, we can actually integrate the flow of money with the flow of information. Hopefully that makes it even more faster to move funds. Because today those two things are separate. So my need to verify the transaction, verify who's sending it, all of that is a separate flow of information, whereas money moves separately. If I can integrate the two and have like both of them flowing together, I can actually start doing things much faster. So I think there is the promise of that, but going back to what everybody said, I think right now we are that if we can solve the basics, we deliver a much better experience already.
No, it's interesting. Just I'll extend this question to Rashmi. Rashmi, what do you think will drive reduction in manual interventions, manual processes through the B2B payment cycle? And what do you think are those points where it can completely be digitized?
I think we kind of address this in various my panelists were speaking. Essentially, I think there are 3 buckets that we have to solve for if we have to think about a completely digital B2B payments. One is customer convenience. And again, when I say convenience, it's a good UI UX, yes. It's also how do you use local payment methods to have faster payments? What can you use? Are you restricted to use a particular card? Can you use some other payment methods? So that also falls into customer convenience according to me. The other thing that I think Anand mentioned is the visibility, right? If I'm making a payment via this method, do I know if it's going to reach? When is it going to reach? Where is my money? Even if I'm making or receiving payments. The third thing is also trust. I think Movin kind of touched on this a little bit, but it's also like, am I giving my funds to an entity that's trusted? Am I working with a licensed entity and trust giving my, like if I'm paying money overseas, I'm used to maybe working with a bank. I'm an SMB. I'm working with a bank. I at least know, okay, I'm working with a bank. But when if I'm working in the digital world, who am I working with? So am I working with a licensed entity? I think those are the 3 or 4 elements that need to be solved. And again, coming back to the point that, there are these big disruptive technologies that we think will come and disrupt B2B payments, but I think we need to start at the basics. If we can solve across these buckets, and there are entities in the ecosystem that are trying to solve these buckets, I think that's when we can actually reduce manual processes.
Movin, you've seen the retail digital payments being disrupted over the last many years, like technologies like NFC, biometrics. Are there any learnings from the retail disruption that can be overlaid on B2B?
Very interesting question. I worked at PhonePe before I started Skydo, so I've also seen how the UPI ecosystem has evolved and what went right and what they are now working on. I think one thing that has definitely gone really well there and we can all learn from the B2B space is the different players in the ecosystem coming together so that, all these issues are ultimately legacy. If B2B payments did not exist till now and it was starting today, then I'm sure the 5 of us could actually make a really great B2B payment system, but that's not the case, right? So there are actually, many more people who've built this over the decades painstakingly and have used whatever technologies and whatever knowledge was available to them at that time and whatever was the, evolution and the customer need at that time. So now we have to build on top of that legacy. We can't just discard it suddenly. But the push from central agencies like NPCI, etc., and similar equivalents in other countries has definitely catalyzed this change. In B2B, we have to figure out what the equivalent of that is, and at least at Skydo, and I'm sure a lot of our other peers are actually trying to, demand this change through various forums and through various industry bodies, etc., and trying to make this change more secular than just one particular startup trying to, build something on top of legacy. So I think it's disruption of legacy that is required, but how fast can we do it is where we can learn from, how consumer payments have evolved and the entire ecosystem has come together to say, okay, there is legacy, but we will still together build and hence it will be fast.
I'm going to open the questions to the audience. Maybe we'll take 1 or 2 questions. So if there are any questions from the audience.
Hi everyone. My question is to the panel. So there's a lot of innovation and there's a lot of trends we are talking about, but especially within B2B, there is a lack of adoption. So any insights you can give into strategies, because there's different reasons for this, as far as the Let me rephrase, maybe we do earlier last.
Maybe I'll take a quick start. I think on just what we previously spoke about, right? I think a lot of times it's thought that connecting various payment systems like UPI across the world will solve B2B payments as well. That could not be farther from the truth. The reason is, even in India, B2B payments don't happen on UPI, at least today. So we need to connect those systems on which B2B payments happen. So I feel sometimes, not always, but one of the reasons for poor adoption could also be that we are trying to get the business to come where we are rather than going where they are. Which is, they are using a particular system. Like businesses in India use NEFT or checks to pay each other. In the US, there is still more than 50% usage of checks for B2B payments. So any system that's trying to disrupt B2B payments has to start from there and cannot just take a high seat and say, this is a modern system which is going to work 100x better, and suddenly everybody will shift to that. That's not going to happen.
I think building on that piece of that is that I think if we can, like Movin said, I don't think we can change habits dramatically. But if we can on the edges, like the check example is a great one, we enable acceptance of checks and then solve the reconciliation problem, which was earlier very manual. Those checks were all coming separately. They didn't know how to sort of make that information flow into their revenue system, accounting system, all of that. But by making that last mile fully automated so that reconciliation is solved at scale, we suddenly make that check experience also look a lot more like an electronic clearing system for them. And I think going there and making those tweaks, helping them sort of make smaller steps to solving something that they're using now, and then over time showing them the economic incentive of moving to electronic payments, I think is a far better way. Very often, of course, the person receiving doesn't have any control over this. I can speak as much as I want, but if the sender says I'll pay only using check, they don't accept checks. There's no two ways about it. Like it depends a lot on what the buyer preferences. And so over time, I think solving for what they want on the edges of it, creating an experience where they say, I see how this is going to help simplify my life, and then slowly getting in and saying, how do I help you create better invoices? How do I integrate payments and link into the invoice itself, which today is separate. Most B2B invoice goes, then there's the whole I'll send my bank information separately. But you can imagine a world very easily where you have a payment link within the invoice, you finish payment and you're done. Those will take time. If I go sell that to somebody right now, they're going to be like, hang on, what's happening here? So I think, like Movin said, going a little bit into what we can solve for them today, and then showing them the benefits and then moving up is a less sort of revolutionary way of doing it, a lot more evolution. Yes, what your experience?
I think I agree with what Anand is saying, of course, what Movin is also saying, in the sense that you cannot suddenly expect someone to move from, let's say, checks to a very different payment method. When I say payment method, I mean like a way of making payments, right? So it's essential to take like these incremental steps. One more point that I would add is, yes, it's important that your reconciliation systems or your invoicing systems talk to each other. That doesn't happen today. That's one of the bigger pain points that we've seen, right? So how do you kind of marry those systems? And if you can show those incremental changes, including if you have to make or receive recurring payments, if you can make that easier, is there a way that we can show them, okay, this is how you can make recurring payments easy instead of writing a check every time, right? So I think I'll just add that to whatever my panelists have said.
I have. Thanks for the information. I completely agree with the part of changing the experience in B2B payment. I would also want to understand what's your take on the regulatory push which is needed for B2B. Given, we have been looking, there are some costs from the regulator side on the B2B payments through third-party applications. So, given that restriction is kind of there, how do you see going forward? What regulatory push would you need for enhancing this growth in the B2B payments?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of regulations around third parties working on processing B2B payments. I think there are level of clarification around that as well. And some of these, from a framework standpoint or process standpoint, there are available tweaks within the regulatory framework. And it depends on the kind of instrument you use, the kind of buyer-supplier arrangement. So a lot of variables over here, but I think we need to live within and work within the existing framework, and I think there is ample room available within that to sort of sustain and provide an adequate input user experiences for this business.
I would add on that I think largely, if you look at digitization of supply chain, government, regulator, all of them are moving in that direction. I don't think they are going counter to it. Sometimes we may feel the pace at which regulation should change is not happening. But I think, like in cross-border, if you see last year, the RBI has made it a lot easier for cross-border payments to happen through third-party payments. So I think they're going in the right direction. So, like Ajay said, I don't think that's the only reason holding back B2B sort of digitization. I think, like you were discussing earlier, getting companies to switch, I think is the more interesting and more important piece. Then I think regulations should be largely okay.
There's a session at 5:40 in DCI right after this. So that might throw some light on scaling B2B in India.
Thanks.
So my attempt to summarize this great panel, it's not about glamorizing B2B payments, but it's about building blocks, plugging into the ecosystem, and building trust, transparency, and efficiency. And thank you to each one of you for contributing significantly to make this happen. So thank you so much. Please give all our panelists a huge round of applause. I would request all of you to stay back on stage since we have something special. Firstly, I would request all of you to come together for a group photograph.